as you surely know, almost everybody is interested in the outcome of the U.S. presidential election on November 3rd. The problem is we may not know who won on November 3rd, and that's what I'd like to address in this video. So you probably know a lot of people are planning to vote by mail, primarily because of COVID-19. They don't want to be exposed waiting in line at the polls. I waited in line behind 200 people at 8 a.m. yesterday to vote, and it took me an hour to vote, but I mean, I felt fairly safe. In our town, everybody had a mask on and was 6 feet apart. But basically what I want to look at is the question is, under some reasonable assumptions, what is the chance that even if Trump eventually gets less votes than Biden, he'll be ahead after election night, November 3rd. So we're going to build 3 models here, and the third model I think is fairly realistic, involving Monte Carlo simulation. So as I write this, basically people think in the polls that Biden's going to get 54% of the vote and Trump 46%. So my assumption cell will be what fraction of people vote for Biden, and 1 minus that is the fraction vote for Trump. Now, the last time I could find data on this in August was that 48% of the Biden voters will plan to vote by mail or absentee, and only 23% of the Trump voters. So that's why there's a decent possibility, even if less people are for Trump, that he'd be ahead on election day, because those Biden votes may come in late. Now, I'm assuming here none of the mail-in votes get counted on election day. We'll relax that assumption later. So then what I want to look at is if you vary this number here, the fraction for Biden, okay, what's the amount by which Trump would be ahead of Biden on election day? Now, it could be negative, but it probably won't be if these numbers are right. So basically, what's the fraction of all voters that would be for Biden on election day, as we count on election day? Okay. Well, I named this cell Biden A, this cell Trump A for all, Biden male, Trump male. Okay, so the votes for Biden would be, in this case, 54% times basically everybody who voted for Biden who didn't vote by mail. So that's 1 minus 48, 54 times 52%. Now, basically, for Trump, it would be the same thing, but use the Trump stuff. So you 46% of the people for Trump, and 1 minus 23% or 77% would basically say they're for Trump. So the Trump minus Biden percentage there, he'd be ahead. Actually, he'd have 7% more of the electorate. I mean, that he'd have a higher percentage of the vote, to be honest, if you work that out. But what I want to do is vary this number here and see what basically the amount Trump would be ahead of Biden on election day. So we'll vary that from 50% for Biden to 60%. So we'll use a one-way data table. So the way this works, okay, the output cell is the amount, basically the fraction of the electorate Trump would have minus the fraction Biden would have. And then I select this range. I go data, what if analysis, data table. Now there's only a column input cell. These get plugged into the Biden percentage, which now says 54. Now they're all the same. I have to hit F9 to make them change because I have a lot of data tables. Okay, so you can see even if Biden had 59% of the vote, that basically Trump would look like he was narrowly ahead if these percentages hold. Now, of course, these numbers are not known with certainty, the numbers in yellow. So that brings us to our next model. Okay, so we'll assume the fraction for Biden, this is what the polls say, maybe 54%. The actual percentage, there's a margin of error in polls of about 3%. So we can model this with norm inverse of RAND, simulates a normal random variable with a given mean and sigma. So the standard deviation is the margin of error in polls, 3%. So we'll say the mean here will be whatever Biden has. So assume the 54% stays still there, stays constant. And then basically, whatever the random number is, if it's 0.5, we get the 50th percentile of this normal, 0.84, 1 sigma above the mean, 0.975, about 2 standard deviations above the mean. Now, the fraction of people, Biden voters who vote by mail and Trump voters, that's going to be random too. So assume that's normal with this mean, and the standard deviation is 5%. So that roughly says we're pretty sure Biden voters by mail will be between 38 and 58%, Trump voters between 13 and 33%. Okay, now we use column G here to basically model what's going on, and it's random. If I hit F9, you can see these numbers change. I'll get to the data table in a minute. But the fraction of all voters who would be for Biden We're again assuming that all the mail votes are counted late, but we'll fix that in the next section of the spreadsheet. So here, this is exactly the same formulas, except we work off column G, the random uncertainty. So we want to play this out 1,000 times and see what fraction of the time Trump is ahead, given the randomness on election day, given the randomness in Biden's a true percentage and the mail-in uncertainties. Okay, so the trick here to do a simulation in Excel, we enter 1 through 1,000 iterations, put the output cell here, the amount Trump's percentage of the electorate beats Biden's. We just want to know if that's positive. Now, the way you trick Excel into doing a simulation, you do data, what if analysis, data table, make the column input cell any blank cell. So then Excel puts 1 in a blank cell, 2 in a blank cell through 1,000, and each time it recalculates the rands. So I hit F9 here. Okay, so the chance Trump would be ahead here is 91%. Okay, now both these models are a bit unrealistic because I haven't accounted for the fact that some of the mail-in votes might be counted on election day. Now you may not know this, but I looked it up on an MIT research article. 10% of the votes in the 2016 presidential election were counted after election day. I don't know what percentage of the mail-in votes. There weren't as many there. Washington and Oregon vote totally by mail. One state, the votes have to be in by election day, the other 6 days later. And so again, if the votes don't have to come in until after election day, you really will have trouble reporting them on election day, I think. Okay, so we've got the same thing in this last worksheet that we had in the previous one, except the fraction of the mail-in votes counted late will vary from 5% to 80%. So we'll have a two-way data table. So the formula for the fraction of the votes that Biden, the electorate that Biden has on election day and Trump on election day is a little different. So who will Biden have on election day? He would have the 54% times the fraction who don't vote by mail, 1 minus 0.48. Okay, but then he'd get some of the mail-in vote. He'd get the 54% times the 48% times 1 minus 0.25, or he would get fraction counted late is 25. He would get 75% of the mail-in votes under this assumption. Again, we don't know what this is, so I'm going to run this for that cell varying. And then for Trump, it's very similar. Who would Trump have as voting for him on election day? He would have the fraction of the population that was for Trump, okay, and 77% of his votes would come from basically not mail-in, okay, because they'd be in person. Okay, that gives him a big boost on election day. And then if you take his 46%, okay, of those 23% would vote by mail, and then 1 minus 25% are counted late, so he would get 75% of those. Then you take the difference, and you can see Trump is down there by 12 points. So if not many are counted late, you can see that Biden would be ahead with this 0.54 here. But now to run this model, so right here I put in a chance, the fraction of mail-in votes that will be counted late. And the output cell here will be the same thing here. You put in the upper left-hand corner, it's going to be Trump fraction of the electorate he has minus the fraction Biden has. Okay, so now what we want to do is run this again. And then here I counted the fraction of the time that basically Trump was ahead. And if only 5% are counted late, it's very small. But if 75% or 80% are counted late, it's very big. So we might have a constitutional crisis in this case. It all depends how they count the mail-in votes. And then they're going to protest the mail-in votes for signatures, things like that. I don't know how that's going to go. I predict a disaster. I'm a pessimist. Okay, no matter who you're for, it'd be a disaster. We don't know who wins for a week or more, I would say. Okay, so we go data what if analysis. So we'll go data table. Okay, now the row input cell, these numbers are the fraction of votes counted late. So the bigger that, the more are counted late. So that these numbers will get, they're in the first row of the data table, they get spit in there. The column input cell can be any blank cell because then it recalculates all our rands. Got to hit F9. Okay, and get numbers slightly different, but the moral of the story is, so let's say only 10, I'd say at least 20% of the mail-in votes will get counted late. And then there's 1 in Even if Biden's ahead by 8%, there's 1 in 6 chances that basically Trump would be ahead on election day. Okay, now if half the votes are counted late, okay, the mail-in votes, then and Biden was ahead by 8 points, which is a lot. I mean, I think that's what he's ahead by as I make this video, but I bet it narrows to 5 or 6. Okay, then basically it's a coin flip that Trump is ahead on election day. And what happens if Trump's ahead on election day? Nobody has a clue. Okay, even if it looks like the polls say Biden would win by a landslide. I mean, polls have been wrong before. Dewey versus Truman, 1948. Landon versus Roosevelt in 1936. So the moral of this is, if we can't count the mail-in votes on time, and a lot more Democrats are going to vote by mail, we may have Trump ahead for a few days after election day for sure, even though many more people were for Biden. This is not a good situation. I think no matter who you're for, you'd agree with that statement. Thanks for listening.